The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of the elderwood forest, casting silver shadows across the forest floor, where Isadora Frostfang stood alone, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Tonight was the choosing ceremony, the night when every unmated wolf in the Silver Moon Pack would find their destined mate under the full moon's blessing. But Isadora had been cast aside, rejected before the ceremony even began, deemed too weak, too ordinary, too Omega to be worthy of standing among her peers. Her white blonde hair caught the moonlight as she turned away from the distant sounds of celebration echoing through the trees. The pack's joy was her sorrow, their unity, her isolation. She pulled her worn cloak tighter around her slender frame and walked deeper into the forest, away from the life that had never truly wanted her. That's when she heard it, a low groan of pain carried on the winter wind. Isadora's instincts, those deep Omega instincts that her pack had scorned, pulled her toward the sound. She moved through the underbrush with practiced silence until she came upon a clearing where an old man lay crumpled against the base of an ancient oak tree. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his weathered face contorted in agony. Silver hair fell across his forehead, and even in his weakened state, there was something noble about his bearing. Without hesitation, Isadora rushed to his side, kneeling in the damp earth beside him. His eyes fluttered open, pale blue and surprisingly alert despite his obvious injuries. "Please," she whispered, her voice soft but urgent. "Let me help you." The old man studied her face for a long moment, and something like recognition flickered in his gaze, though they had never met. "You should run, young one. They might come back." "Who?" Isadora asked, already examining his wounds with gentle fingers. Deep claw marks raked across his chest, and his left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. "Rogues," he gasped, "hunting for something they'll never find." Isadora didn't waste time with more questions. She tore strips from her cloak and began bandaging his worst wounds, her touch careful and sure. Her mother had been a healer before she died, and Isadora had inherited her gentle hands, if not her strength. "What's your name?" the old man asked as she worked. "Isadora. Isadora Frostfang." She met his eyes briefly before returning to her task. "And you?" He hesitated, then replied simply, "Call me Thomas." As Isadora worked through the night to stabilize Thomas's injuries, she didn't notice the way he watched her with a mixture of wonder and sadness. She didn't see how his eyes widened when she hummed an old healing song her mother had taught her, the same song his own mate had sung decades ago. She couldn't know that this old man she'd found bleeding in the forest was Thomas Steelbane, the former Alpha King who had vanished without a trace 3 years prior, leaving his son Julian to rule the kingdom in confusion and grief. Thomas said nothing of his true identity. Something told him that this girl, this rejected Omega with kindness in her eyes and gentleness in her touch, was exactly where fate needed her to be. And if he revealed who he was too soon, everything might unravel before it had a chance to begin. "Why are you out here alone?" Thomas asked, as Isadora helped him drink from her water flask. "On the night of a choosing ceremony, no less. I can hear the celebrations from here." Pain flickered across Isadora's delicate features. "I wasn't chosen to attend." "Impossible," Thomas said firmly. "You're of age, aren't you?" "Age doesn't matter when you're considered defective," Isadora replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "My wolf is small, weak. I have no family name of importance, no strength to offer a mate. The pack decided I wasn't worthy of the ceremony. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story." Thomas's jaw tightened with barely concealed anger. "Then your pack are fools." Isadora looked up, startled by the fierce conviction in his voice. For a moment, the old man before her seemed almost regal, as if he'd commanded respect all his life. "You have a good heart," Thomas continued softly. "That matters more than strength." "Not in our world," Isadora said sadly. "But thank you for saying so." She helped Thomas to a more comfortable position against the tree, fashioning a makeshift splint for his leg using branches and more strips of fabric. The night grew deeper around them, and the sounds of the ceremony faded into silence. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled in celebration, newly mated pairs running together through the forest in joy. Isadora blinked back tears she refused to shed. "Will you stay with me tonight?" Thomas asked gently. "I don't think I should be moved until morning, and I'd feel safer with you here." The truth was, Thomas could have healed himself. As the former Alpha King, his abilities were formidable, even in his advanced years. But something told him this girl needed purpose as much as he needed to observe her, to understand what fate was clearly orchestrating. "Of course," Isadora agreed. She gathered dry wood and built a small fire, her movements efficient and practiced. Soon, warmth bloomed between them, pushing back the winter cold. They talked through the night, an odd pair bound by circumstance. Thomas asked her about her life, and Isadora found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. Her loneliness, her dreams, her secret hope that somewhere in the world there was a place where she belonged. "Tell me about your family," Isadora asked as dawn approached, turning the sky soft shades of pink and gold. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I had a son once. Strong, fierce, everything an alpha should be. But I left him when he needed me most, and I don't know if he'll ever forgive me." "Why did you leave?" "I was lost," Thomas admitted. "My mate had died, and I couldn't bear the weight of leadership without her. So I ran like a coward, and I've been wandering ever since, trying to find a reason to go back." Isadora reached out and gently squeezed his weathered hand. "It's not too late, you know, to go home. I'm sure your son misses you more than you realize." Thomas looked at this young woman who had been rejected and cast aside, yet still had faith in reconciliation and love. "How can you be so certain?" "Because that's what love is," Isadora said simply. "It endures, even when we think it's gone." As the first full light of morning broke through the trees, Thomas made a decision. "Come with me, Isadora. I know a place where you'd be welcome, where your gifts would be valued." "Where?" "The royal court. My son might not want to see me, but he's a good man. He'd give you sanctuary." Isadora's eyes widened. "Your son is at the royal court? What is he, a guard?" Thomas smiled mysteriously. "Something like that. Will you come? I'm too injured to make the journey alone, and I think fate brought us together for a reason." Isadora looked back toward her pack's territory, toward the life that had never wanted her. Then she looked at this kind old man who saw value in her when no one else did. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll come with you." They set out at midday, after Isadora had gathered supplies from her small cottage on the outskirts of pack territory. No one noticed her leaving. No one came to say goodbye. She was a ghost in her own home, and disappearing changed nothing for those who had never truly seen her. The journey to the royal court took 3 days. Thomas's injuries were severe enough that they had to move slowly, and Isadora supported much of his weight as they traveled. She redressed his wounds each night, fed him, and kept his spirits up with quiet conversation. Thomas, in turn, observed everything about her. The way she noticed small beauties others would miss. A bird's nest, a patch of early spring flowers, the pattern of ice on a stream. The way she was endlessly patient with his limitations, never complaining about their slow pace. The way her eyes held both deep sadness and stubborn hope. Yes, Thomas thought, she was exactly what Julian needed, even if his son didn't know it yet. On the 3rd evening, they crested a hill, and the royal court came into view. Isadora gasped. She had never seen anything so magnificent. The palace rose from the valley below like something from a dream, all white stone and soaring towers, with the royal pack's territory spreading out around it in a vast, protected haven. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Thomas said softly. Then, more quietly, "Or it was once." They made their way down the hillside as twilight fell. Guards spotted them at the outer perimeter, and Thomas lowered his hood, revealing his face for the first time to his own people in 3 years. The reaction was instant and explosive. Guards shouted and ran toward them, some in joy, others in shock. Within minutes, they were surrounded by warriors, all of them staring at Thomas as if seeing a ghost. "Former King Thomas," one of the guards breathed. You're alive. The Alpha King thought. We all thought. I know what you thought, Thomas interrupted gently. And I'm sorry for the pain my absence caused. But I'm here now, and I need to see my son. Right away, sir. But who is this? The guard gestured to Isadora, who stood slightly behind Thomas, overwhelmed by the attention. This is Isadora Frostfang, Thomas said firmly. She saved my life and escorted me home safely. She is to be treated as an honored guest. Is that clear? Yes, sir. They were escorted through the palace gates and into the grand entrance hall. Isadora had never felt so small, so out of place. Everyone who passed stared at her, this unknown Omega in worn clothing standing beside the lost king. She kept her eyes down, reverting to the submissive behavior her pack had trained into her. Thomas noticed and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You belong here, Isadora. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Before she could respond, the energy in the room changed. It grew heavy, charged with alpha dominance so powerful that Isadora's wolf instinctively lowered itself in her mind. She looked up and forgot how to breathe. A man strode toward them through the parting crowd, and he was the most magnificent thing Isadora had ever seen. Tall and powerfully built, with long black hair that fell past his shoulders and a thick beard that framed a face of stark, masculine beauty. His eyes were storm gray and intense, fixed on Thomas with an expression of such complex emotion that Isadora couldn't parse it all. Joy, anger, grief, relief, all warring for dominance. This was Alpha King Julian Steelbane, and his presence filled the room like thunder before a storm. Father, Julian said, his voice low and rough with barely controlled emotion. 3 years. 3 years you were gone, and now you appear like a ghost at my gates. Julian, Thomas began, but his son held up a hand. We'll talk, but not here, not now. Julian's eyes moved to Isadora for the first time, and the impact of his gaze nearly sent her to her knees. Something flickered in those stormy depths, something that made her wolf stir with interest despite her fear. Who is this? Isadora Frostfang, Thomas answered, when Isadora seemed incapable of speech. She saved my life when rogues attacked me in the Elderwood Forest. I owe her everything. Julian studied Isadora with an intensity that made her skin flush. He saw everything in that one long look. Her worn clothing, her Omega status, her beauty that was soft and understated rather than bold. He saw her kindness in the way she stayed close to his father despite her obvious fear. He saw her strength in the proud lift of her chin, even as she trembled under his scrutiny. And something in Julian Steelbane's carefully controlled world shifted. Welcome to the royal court, Isadora Frostfang, he said, his voice slightly softer. You have my gratitude for protecting what is precious to me. You'll want for nothing during your stay here. Thank you, Alpha King, Isadora managed, her voice barely audible. Julian's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned back to his father. Rooms will be prepared for both of you. We'll speak tomorrow, Father, when you've rested. With that, the Alpha King turned and strode away, his long hair flowing behind him like a dark banner. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow, and Isadora realized she'd been holding her breath. That's your son? She whispered to Thomas. Yes. And I have a feeling your story is only just beginning, my dear. Isadora was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire cottage back in Silver Moonpack territory. Servants drew her a bath, brought her food, and laid out clothing fit for a lady of the court. She stood in the marble bathroom, staring at her reflection in the gilded mirror, and wondered if she was dreaming. But the warmth of the bathwater was real, as was the softness of the silk nightgown they'd provided. She ate alone in her rooms, too overwhelmed to face the grand dining hall, and eventually climbed into a bed so comfortable she thought she might sink straight through to the floor. Sleep, however, wouldn't come. Her mind kept returning to the Alpha King, Julian, and the way he'd looked at her. There had been something in his eyes, something that called to her Omega instincts in a way she'd never experienced. It terrified her. She was still awake when a soft knock came at her door near midnight. Isadora wrapped a robe around herself and opened it to find Thomas standing there. looking far better than he had any right to after his injuries. "Can't sleep either?" he asked with a knowing smile. "The bed is too soft," Isadora said, which was both true and a complete evasion of her real thoughts. "Walk with me," Thomas suggested. "I'll show you the palace gardens. They're beautiful by moonlight." They walked through quiet corridors and out into gardens that took Isadora's breath away. Flowers bloomed everywhere despite the season, protected by the palace's magical wards, and a fountain carved from white marble sang its endless song in the center of a circular courtyard. "Thomas," Isadora said as they walked, "who exactly is your son?" "I think you know," Thomas replied gently. "The Alpha King," Isadora whispered. "Your son is the Alpha King of all the packs, and I called him something like a guard." Thomas chuckled. He probably found that refreshing. "Everyone treats him like he's more god than man. It gets tiresome, I imagine. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have come if you'd known?" Isadora considered this and realized he was right. She would have been too afraid, too certain that she didn't belong in such a world. "Probably not," she admitted. "I knew you needed to be here," Thomas said. "And Julian needs you, though he doesn't know it yet." "What do you mean?" But Thomas just smiled mysteriously and said, "Give it time, my dear. Fate has a way of revealing itself." They walked in comfortable silence for a while longer, until a deep voice broke through the quiet. "Father, I should have known I'd find you avoiding your rest." Julian emerged from the shadows near the fountain, and Isadora's heart stuttered. He'd changed from his formal attire into simple black clothing that somehow made him look even more imposing. His long hair was loose around his shoulders, and his beard caught the moonlight. "Julian," Thomas said warmly, "I was just showing Isadora your gardens." "I see." Julian's eyes moved to Isadora, and again she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "Do you like them?" "They're beautiful, Alpha King," Isadora said softly. "I've never seen flowers bloom in winter before." "The palace wards make many impossible things possible," Julian said. "And you may call me Julian. Any friend of my father's is welcome to dispense with formality in private." "I couldn't possibly. I insist." There was command in his voice, the natural authority of an alpha who expected to be obeyed. "Julian, then," Isadora agreed quietly. Thomas watched the exchange with barely hidden satisfaction. "I think I'll retire now. My injuries are making themselves known. Isadora, will you be all right finding your way back?" It was a transparent excuse to leave them alone, and all three of them knew it. Isadora wanted to protest, but Thomas was already walking away, leaving her alone with the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Silence stretched between them, not entirely comfortable. Julian moved to the fountain and sat on its edge, gesturing for Isadora to join him. After a moment's hesitation, she did. "Tell me how you found my father," Julian said. So Isadora told him. About being rejected from the choosing ceremony, about hearing Thomas's cries for help, about caring for him through the night and agreeing to escort him home. She left out the depth of her own pain, the loneliness that had driven her into the woods in the first place, but she suspected Julian heard it anyway, in the things she didn't say. "Your pack rejected you from the ceremony?" Julian's voice had gone cold, dangerous. "On what grounds?" "I'm weak, Alpha." "Julian, my wolf is small, and I have no family connections, no strength to offer a mate. They decided I wasn't worthy of participating. And you accepted this judgment?" There was no criticism in his question, only genuine curiosity. "What choice did I have?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fountain's flowing water. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "My mother was an Omega. Did you know that?" Isadora's eyes widened. "No, I didn't." "The strongest alpha in 5 generations chose an Omega for his mate," Julian continued, "because he recognized that strength comes in many forms. She was the gentlest, kindest person I ever knew, but when it came to protecting her family, she was fiercer than any warrior. She taught me that dominance isn't the only measure of worth. She sounds wonderful. She was." Grief flickered across Julian's handsome features. "When she died, my father broke. He couldn't bear ruling without her. So he left. For 3 years, I've led our people while wondering if he was dead or alive, if he abandoned us by choice or was taken by force. Isadora heard the pain beneath his words, the loneliness that echoed her own. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the fountain's edge. Julian looked down at her small, pale hand covering his larger, scarred one. Something passed between them, a spark of connection that made them both catch their breath. His wolf, which had been silent and dormant for years, suddenly surged to attention, recognizing something in this soft-spoken Omega that it had never found in anyone else. "Mate," his wolf whispered. "Ours." Julian pulled his hand away as if burned. It was impossible. He'd attended dozens of choosing ceremonies, had been present when hundreds of wolves found their mates, and never once had he felt the bond. He'd resigned himself to a mateless existence, focused entirely on his duties as king. He couldn't be feeling the mate bond now. Not with this Omega he'd just met. Not with someone so fragile she looked like she might break under the weight of his world. "I should let you rest," Julian said abruptly, standing. "Thank you for bringing my father home, Isadora. Your service to the crown won't be forgotten." He strode away before she could respond, leaving Isadora alone by the fountain, confused and hurt by his sudden coldness. She could still feel the warmth where his hand had been under hers, still feel the echo of something profound that had passed between them. Had she imagined it? Had she somehow offended him? Isadora made her way back to her rooms with a heavy heart, convinced that she'd already failed in this new world, just as she'd failed in her old one. But in his own chambers, Julian paced like a caged animal, his wolf clawing at his consciousness, demanding he return to the Omega, claim her, protect her, make her his. He'd built walls around his heart for years, told himself he didn't need or want a mate. His duty was to his people, not to his own happiness. And yet one touch from Isadora Frostfang had threatened to bring those walls crashing down. No, Julian told himself firmly. He would not burden her with the weight of being his queen. She deserved better than a life of politics and danger, better than a mate who was more monster than man when it came to protecting his kingdom. He would keep his distance. It was better for both of them. But fate, as Thomas could have told him, rarely cares about what we think is better. The next few days passed in a strange limbo for Isadora. Thomas was often closeted with Julian, working through 3 years of separation and pain. Isadora was given free run of the palace and treated with respect by the staff, but she felt adrift, purposeless, and she kept seeing Julian, at meals, in corridors, in the gardens. He was always polite but distant, treating her with the same courteous detachment he showed everyone else. It shouldn't have hurt, but it did. That moment of connection by the fountain haunted her, made her wonder if she'd glimpsed something real or just projected her own desperate loneliness onto a kind gesture. On the 4th day, Thomas found her in the library, curled up in a window seat with a book she wasn't really reading. "He's afraid of you," Thomas said without preamble. Isadora looked up, startled. "What?" "Julian. He's afraid of what he feels for you, so he's pushing you away." "I don't understand. He barely knows me." Thomas settled into a chair across from her, his blue eyes warm with understanding. "Have you heard of the mate bond, Isadora?" "Of course. It's what they were celebrating at the choosing ceremony, the instant recognition between destined mates." "And did you feel anything when you first saw my son?" Isadora's cheeks flushed. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Thomas leaned forward. "Julian felt it too. That's why he's been avoiding you. He's convinced himself that he doesn't deserve happiness, that duty comes before everything else. He's wrong, of course, but telling him that won't help. He needs to come to that realization himself." "Even if what you're saying is true," Isadora said carefully, "why would the Alpha King be destined for someone like me? I'm nobody. I'm weak. I have nothing to offer him." "You have everything to offer him," Thomas countered firmly. "You have kindness where he has learned suspicion. You have gentleness where he has only known the harshness of leadership. You have hope where he has felt only duty. You're exactly what he needs, Isadora." And I think he's exactly what you need, too. Isadora wanted to believe him, but her lifetime of rejection had taught her to be cautious with hope. What am I supposed to do? Be yourself. Be patient. And trust that fate knows what it's doing. That evening, there was a feast to celebrate Thomas's return. The grand hall was filled with nobles and warriors, all of them dressed in their finest. Isadora had been provided with a gown of pale blue silk that made her white blonde hair seem to glow. She felt like an imposter among all this finery, but she held her head high as she entered the hall. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her, and Isadora fought the urge to run. Then she saw Julian at the head table, and the look on his face made her forget everyone else in the room. He was staring at her with an intensity that stole her breath, his storm-gray eyes dark with something that looked like hunger. For a moment, neither of them moved. The mate bond pulsed between them, undeniable and fierce, and Julian's carefully maintained control wavered. Then Thomas appeared at Isadora's side, offering his arm. "Shall we? I believe there's a seat for you at the head table." The feast was a blur for Isadora. She was intensely aware of Julian sitting just a few seats away, of the way his eyes kept finding her even as he spoke with other nobles. She picked at her food and tried to focus on Thomas's quiet commentary about the various attendees, but her attention kept drifting. Halfway through the evening, a young Alpha approached the head table and bowed to Julian. "Alpha King, I request permission to invite Lady Isadora to dance." Everything in Julian screamed at him to refuse, to claim this Omega as his own, to let every male in the room know that she was off limits. But he had no right to such possessiveness, not when he'd decided to keep his distance. "The lady may choose for herself," Julian said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. The young Alpha turned to Isadora hopefully. "My lady?" Isadora didn't want to dance with this stranger. She wanted Julian to object, to show any sign that he felt the connection she felt, but his face was impassive, regal, giving nothing away. "Thank you, but I'm not feeling well," Isadora said softly. "Perhaps another time." Relief flooded Julian so intensely that he had to grip his chair to maintain his composure. His wolf had been ready to tear the young Alpha apart for even approaching their mate. The evening continued, but the tension between Julian and Isadora only grew. When the dancing began, Julian watched Alpha after Alpha approach her, and each time she declined, his wolf purred with satisfaction. But when a particularly persistent noble ignored her refusal and reached for her hand, Julian was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to move. He crossed the room in long, powerful strides and stepped between Isadora and the persistent noble, his presence radiating such dominance that the other Alpha immediately backed away. "The lady said no," Julian growled, his voice carrying the weight of command. "I suggest you learn to respect that." The noble bowed hastily and retreated. Julian turned to Isadora, his gray eyes intense. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thank you," Isadora breathed. Up close, surrounded by his presence, her wolf was going wild, crying out for her to move closer, to touch him, to claim what was theirs. Julian seemed to be fighting the same battle. His hand rose as if to cup her face, then fell back to his side. "I apologize for his behavior. You shouldn't have to endure such disrespect in my court. It's not your fault." They stood there, inches apart, the mate bond pulling them together while Julian's stubborn will held them apart. Around them, the feast continued, but in their own small space, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "Dance with me," Julian said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they did her. "I thought you didn't dance," Isadora replied, remembering hearing the servants gossip about how the Alpha King never participated in social dances. "I don't, but I find I'm making exceptions for you." He offered his hand, and after only a moment's hesitation, Isadora took it. The moment their palms met, electricity shot through them both. Julian led Isadora to the dance floor, and when he pulled her into the formal frame, his touch was both firm and infinitely gentle. They began to move, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if they'd danced together 1,000 times before. "You're a good dancer," Isadora said softly. "My mother insisted I learn," Julian replied, his voice low and intimate. She said a king who couldn't dance with his people couldn't truly understand them. She sounds very wise. She was. Julian's gray eyes held Isadora's, and she saw past the fierce alpha king to the man beneath, lonely, grieving, desperate for connection, but afraid to reach for it. Isadora, I need to tell you something. What is it? But before he could speak, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the hall. Guards burst through the doors, supporting a bloodied warrior between them. Alpha King! One of the guards called urgently. Rogues have attacked the southern border. Multiple packs are requesting aid. Just like that, the moment shattered. Julian's expression shifted from vulnerable to commanding in an instant. He released Isadora and strode toward the guards, all business. How many? He demanded. At least 50, sir. Well organized and heavily armed. This wasn't a random attack. Julian's jaw tightened. He began issuing orders, calling warriors to assemble, sending messengers to allied packs. In moments, he had organized a response with the efficiency of a leader who had been trained for war his entire life. Isadora watched from the dance floor, seeing the transformation from the man who had held her gently to the warrior king, who would defend his people at any cost. Both aspects of him called to her, the gentleness and the strength, the vulnerability and the fierce protectiveness. Before Julian left the hall to lead his warriors, he turned back one last time and found Isadora in the crowd. Their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw promise and regret, desire and denial. Then he was gone, swept away by duty and war. Thomas appeared at Isadora's side. Come, my dear. Let's get you somewhere safe. When Julian goes into battle, the palace is always put under extra guard. Will he be all right? Isadora asked, her heart clenching with fear. Julian is the finest warrior I've ever seen, Thomas assured her. But I won't lie to you. Every battle carries risk. All we can do is wait and hope. The waiting was agony. Isadora paced her rooms, unable to eat or rest. She barely knew Julian, yet the thought of him being hurt or killed filled her with a terror she'd never experienced. The mate bond, still new and unacknowledged, pulled at her heart with painful insistence. 2 days passed with no word. Isadora haunted the halls like a ghost, jumping at every sound, hoping for news. Thomas stayed with her as much as he could, offering quiet support. On the 3rd day, scouts returned with news. The battle had been fierce but victorious. The rogues had been driven back, but there had been casualties. The Alpha King had been at the front of every charge, fighting with a ferocity that was legendary even among his own warriors. Is he hurt? Isadora demanded of the scout who'd brought the news. Some injuries, my lady, but nothing serious. The Alpha King refuses healing until all his warriors have been tended to. They should return by nightfall. Isadora spent the rest of the day in the palace infirmary, helping the healers prepare for the incoming wounded. It was work she knew, work that gave her hands something to do while her heart waited in suspended animation. When the warriors finally returned, Isadora was in the courtyard with the other healers, ready to receive the injured. She saw Julian immediately. It would have been impossible not to. He was covered in blood and dirt, his long black hair tangled, and his face grim with exhaustion. But he was walking on his own, was alive and whole, and Isadora felt tears of relief sting her eyes. Julian's gaze swept the courtyard and locked onto her. For a moment, everything else fell away. Despite his exhaustion, despite being surrounded by his warriors, his entire focus narrowed to the Omega, who stood waiting for him. He moved toward her with predatory grace, and Isadora met him halfway. They stopped just inches apart, both breathing hard, both fighting the urge to close the remaining distance. You're hurt, Isadora said, seeing the blood seeping through his torn shirt. It's nothing. Let me help you. It wasn't a request. Julian wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain his distance, but the battle had stripped away some of his careful control. He was tired of fighting what he felt, tired of denying what his wolf screamed at him every moment he was near her. All right, he agreed quietly. Isadora led him into the palace, and to her rooms, which were closer than the infirmary and more private. Julian sat on the edge of her bed while she gathered supplies with shaking hands. When she returned and began carefully removing his shirt, her fingers brushing against his skin, Julian had to close his eyes against the overwhelming rightness of her touch. "You fought well," Isadora said softly as she cleaned his wounds. They were deeper than he'd admitted, claw marks across his ribs and a sword cut on his shoulder. "The scout said you were magnificent. I was protecting my people. There's nothing magnificent about it. There is when you risk yourself for others." Isadora began stitching the worst of his wounds with practiced skill. "When you put their safety above your own, that's what makes a true king." Julian opened his eyes and found her face very close to his, her expression intent on her work. Her white blonde hair had fallen forward, creating a curtain that shut out the rest of the world. In this moment, in the quiet intimacy of her caring for him, Julian's carefully constructed walls finally crumbled. "Isadora," he said softly. She looked up, and her breath caught at the raw emotion in his eyes. "I've been a fool," Julian continued. "I felt the mate bond the moment I saw you, and I've been fighting it because I thought I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was afraid that if I let myself care for you, I would lose you the way my father lost my mother. I couldn't bear that pain again." Isadora set aside her supplies and cupped Julian's bearded face in her small hands. "I felt it too," she whispered. "The bond. I thought I was imagining it, that someone like you could never want someone like me." "Someone like me," Julian repeated incredulously. He covered her hands with his much larger ones. "Isadora, you're everything. You're kind where this world has made me hard. You're gentle where I've had to be fierce. You're hope and light and beauty. And I don't deserve you. But I find I'm too selfish to let you go." "Then don't," Isadora said simply. Julian pulled her closer, his gray eyes searching hers. "If I claim you as my mate, you'll become queen. You'll face politics and danger and constant scrutiny. Your life will never be simple or peaceful again. Are you certain you want that?" "I don't want simple or peaceful," Isadora replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I want you. All of you. The king and the man, the fierce warrior, and the son who missed his father. I want the life we could build together, whatever challenges it brings." "You humble me," Julian breathed. Then, finally giving in to what he'd wanted since the moment he'd first seen her, he lowered his head and claimed her lips in a kiss that sealed their fate. The mate bond snapped fully into place with the force of a lightning strike. Isadora gasped against Julian's mouth as power and emotion flooded through their connection. She felt his strength, his fierce protectiveness, his desperate loneliness that was finally being healed. And Julian felt her gentleness, her resilient hope, her capacity for love that had survived despite all the rejection she'd endured. They broke apart, both breathing hard, both transformed by what they'd just experienced. "Mine," Julian growled, his wolf surging forward with possessive satisfaction. "Yours," Isadora agreed, then added with a small smile, "And you're mine too, Alpha King." "Just Julian," he corrected, pulling her into his lap despite his injuries. "When we're alone, I'm just Julian, just your mate." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, feeling the rightness of their connection. Eventually, Isadora insisted on finishing her treatment of his wounds, and Julian submitted with surprisingly good grace, content to watch her work with eyes full of wonder. "When did you know?" Isadora asked as she bandaged his shoulder. "That I was your mate? The moment you touched my hand by the fountain," Julian admitted. "My wolf recognized you instantly. I've spent 3 years thinking I would never have a mate, never have this connection. And then you appeared, this Omega my father brought home, and everything I thought I knew was turned upside down. I thought I was too weak to ever be chosen," Isadora said quietly. "My pack made me believe I had nothing to offer." Julian's arms tightened around her, his voice going low and dangerous. "Your former pack are fools who will learn to regret how they treated you. You're an Omega, yes, but there's nothing weak about you. You saved my father's life. You've survived rejection and loneliness without becoming bitter. You have a strength they'll never understand. You make me believe I can be more than I was," Isadora whispered. "You already are more," Julian assured her. "You just needed someone to see it." They talked through the night, sharing their stories, their fears, their hopes. Julian told her about the weight of leadership, about the constant decisions that affected thousands of lives, about the loneliness of being the one everyone looked to for strength. Isadora told him about her childhood, about losing her mother, about the slow erosion of her self-worth under her pack's constant rejection. "I won't let anyone make you feel less than again," Julian promised fiercely. "You're my mate, my queen. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me, and they'll learn that's a very dangerous thing to do. I don't need you to fight my battles," Isadora said gently, "but I appreciate knowing you would." "That's the thing about being my mate," Julian said, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "We fight each other's battles together. Your struggles are mine, and mine are yours. We face everything as one." As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Julian and Isadora finally emerged from her rooms. They found Thomas waiting in the corridor, a knowing smile on his weathered face. "So," he said, "I take it you two have finally stopped being stubborn?" Julian had the grace to look slightly abashed. "How long have you known?" "That you were mates? Since the moment I saw you look at her," Thomas replied. "I'm old, Julian, not blind. The question was whether you'd both stop fighting fate long enough to accept it." "You could have said something," Julian pointed out. "Would you have listened?" Julian considered this and laughed, a sound Isadora realized she'd never heard from him before. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. "No, probably not." "Exactly." Thomas embraced them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I'm happy for you, son. Truly. Your mother would have loved Isadora." "I wish she could have met her," Julian said softly. "In a way, she already has," Thomas replied mysteriously. Isadora sang the healing song Luna used to sing. The same song, with the same gentleness. That's when I knew. The formal announcement of Julian and Isadora's mating came 3 days later, after a traditional bonding ceremony attended by representatives from every pack in the kingdom. Isadora wore a gown of silver and white, looking like moonlight made flesh, and Julian wore the formal regalia of the Alpha King, magnificent and intimidating. But when they exchanged the ritual bites that would mark them as mated for life, when Julian's teeth sank gently into the curve of Isadora's neck and her omega scent bloomed with the mark of her alpha, there was nothing formal or intimidating about it. There was only love, fierce and true, and finally acknowledged. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. Wolves from across the kingdom came to pay their respects to their new queen, and to everyone's surprise, the rejected Omega, who had been deemed too weak to attend her own pack's choosing ceremony, greeted each visitor with grace and genuine warmth. Thomas watched it all with deep satisfaction, knowing that his disappearance 3 years ago, as painful as it had been, had served a purpose. He'd needed to be in that forest, wounded and alone, so that Isadora could find him. She'd needed to be rejected by her pack, so she'd be free to accept her true destiny. Fate, he reflected, often worked in ways that seemed cruel until you could see the full picture. On the 4th night after the bonding ceremony, Julian found Isadora alone on the balcony of their shared chambers, staring out at the moonlit kingdom below. "Regrets?" he asked softly, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "None," Isadora replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Though sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I'm here, with you, accepted and valued and loved." "Believe it," Julian murmured against her hair. "You're my mate, my queen, my everything. There is nothing I wouldn't do for you. No battle I wouldn't fight. No challenge I wouldn't face. I know." Isadora turned in his arms to face him. "And I promise you the same. I might not be a warrior, but I'm strong in other ways. I'll stand beside you, support you, love you through whatever comes." I never doubted it. Julian kissed her softly, then more deeply, and Isadora melted into him, still marveling at how perfectly they fit together. Their peace, however, was not to last. A month after their bonding, disturbing news began arriving from across the kingdom. Rogue attacks were increasing, becoming more organized and more vicious. Small packs were being targeted, their territories burned, their members killed or scattered. Julian spent long hours in war councils, trying to determine who was behind the attacks and what they wanted. Isadora attended these meetings, and her quiet insights often proved valuable. She saw patterns others missed, connections that only became clear when viewed through her more gentle perspective. "They're not attacking the strongest packs," she observed during one particularly contentious council session. "They're targeting the most isolated ones, the ones without strong alliances." "Which means whoever is leading them is smart," Julian replied grimly. "They're weakening the kingdom's foundations before striking at its heart." "Or they're looking for something," Thomas suggested. He'd been attending the councils as an advisor, his experience as former king invaluable. "The attack started shortly before I returned. What if someone was looking for me?" "Why would rogues be searching for you?" one of the counselors asked. "Because I know something they don't want revealed," Thomas said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "Before I left, I was investigating reports of a conspiracy within the noble houses. Someone was selling information to our enemies, weakening our defenses from within. I never discovered who, but whoever it was might think I did." Julian's expression turned thunderous. "You're saying we have a traitor in our own court?" "It's possible." The revelation sent shockwaves through the council. For the next several weeks, Julian worked tirelessly to root out the conspiracy, all while continuing to defend against rogue attacks. The strain began to show. He slept little, ate less, drove himself to exhaustion. Isadora watched her mate slowly burning himself out and knew she had to intervene. One night, when Julian returned to their chambers long after midnight, she was waiting for him. "Enough," she said firmly when he tried to go straight to the pile of reports waiting on his desk. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Isadora, You have to take care of yourself," she interrupted, using the alpha command in her voice that only a mate could employ. Julian's wolf responded instantly, recognizing the care behind her order. "Come to bed. The reports will be there in the morning." Julian looked at her, his small gentle Omega standing between him and his work, with determination in her eyes, and felt something in his chest unwind. She was right. He was pushing too hard, letting his need to protect everyone drive him past reasonable limits. "All right," he conceded, allowing her to lead him to their bed, "but only because my mate commands it." "Smart alpha," Isadora murmured, helping him remove his clothes and pulling him down beside her. She wrapped herself around him, and Julian relaxed into her embrace, finally allowing himself to rest. "I'm afraid," Julian admitted quietly into the darkness. "Afraid that I'll fail, that I won't be able to protect everyone, that I'll lose you the way my father lost my mother." "You won't lose me," Isadora promised. "I'm stronger than I look, and I'm not going anywhere. We face things together, remember? You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." Julian held her tighter, breathing in her comforting scent. "How did I survive without you?" "The same way I survived without you," Isadora replied. "We endured. But now we get to do more than just survive. We get to live, to love, to build something beautiful together." In the warmth of their bed, surrounded by their mate's presence, both Julian and Isadora finally found the peace that had eluded them all their lives. But peace, they would soon learn, is often fleeting. The betrayal, when it was finally uncovered, came from an unexpected source. Lord Marcus, one of Julian's most trusted counselors, and a man who had served the crown for decades, was revealed as the architect of the conspiracy. He'd been selling information to the rogues, coordinating the attacks, all because he believed Julian was too young and inexperienced to rule, that the kingdom needed stronger leadership. The trial was swift, and the evidence damning. Lord Marcus showed no remorse, insisting he'd acted in the kingdom's best interests. Julian, with Isadora standing supportively at his side, passed judgment with the authority of a king and the mercy of a man who understood that good intentions could lead to terrible actions. "You betrayed not just me, but every wolf in this kingdom," Julian said, his voice carrying throughout the crowded judgment hall. "Your sentence is exile. You will be stripped of your title and lands, marked as traitor, and cast out beyond our borders. If you ever set foot in our territory again, the sentence will be death." It was harsh but fair, and no one in the hall objected. Lord Marcus was led away, and the kingdom began the slow process of healing from his betrayal. With the conspiracy exposed, the rogue attacks ceased. The packs that had been scattered began to rebuild, supported by resources and warriors sent from the royal court. Peace, fragile and new, settled over the kingdom. Isadora threw herself into helping those who had suffered from the attacks. She worked with displaced families, helped establish healing centers, and used her gentle nature to comfort those who had lost loved ones. The kingdom watched their young Omega Queen with growing respect and affection, realizing that she was exactly the balance their fierce king needed. Julian watched his mate work and fell more deeply in love with her every day. She'd transformed his world, softened his hard edges without diminishing his strength, given him hope for the future. And when, 6 months after their bonding, Isadora shyly told him she was carrying their child, Julian's fierce warrior heart nearly burst with joy. "You're certain?" he asked, his hands already moving protectively to her still flat stomach. "The healers confirmed it this morning," Isadora said, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "We're going to have a pup, Julian." Julian swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. Then he set her down carefully, as if she might break, his expression shifting to one of fierce protectiveness. "Nothing will harm you or our child," he vowed. "I swear it." "I know," Isadora said, touching his face gently. "But you also need to trust that I'm not fragile, that I can handle what comes. I'm not just your mate to be protected. I'm your partner, remember?" "I remember," Julian agreed, though his wolf was already growling about increased security measures and wrapping their mate in protective cushions. "But allow me some possessive alpha instincts. It's going to be a long 7 months." Isadora laughed, and the sound filled Julian with such profound contentment that he wondered how he'd ever thought he could live without this, without her. The kingdom celebrated the news of their future heir, with parties and gifts and well wishes from across the territories. Isadora's pregnancy was easy and healthy, and she remained active in her charitable work, even as her belly grew round with their child. Thomas watched the preparations for his grandchild with quiet satisfaction. He'd found his purpose again, was rebuilding his relationship with Julian day by day, and had the joy of watching his son find the happiness he'd once had with Luna. One evening, as Isadora sat in the nursery they were preparing, arranging tiny clothes and blankets, Thomas joined her. "I want to thank you," he said, settling into the chair beside hers, "for everything you've given us. For saving my life, yes, but more than that, for saving Julian's heart. He was becoming hard, closed off, more king than man. You brought him back to himself. He did the same for me," Isadora replied. "I was lost when you found me, Thomas. Rejected and purposeless and so lonely I could barely breathe. Julian gave me a place to belong, a role that matters, a love that heals. You were both lost," Thomas said wisely, "and you found each other. That's how the mate bond works. It brings together the pieces that complete each other. Do you ever regret it?" Isadora asked softly. "Finding your mate, knowing you'd have to bear the pain of losing her?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "Luna gave me the best years of my life. She gave me Julian and countless moments of joy I treasure still. The pain of losing her was terrible. Yes, but I wouldn't trade a single day we had together to avoid that pain. Love is always worth the risk." Isadora placed a hand on her swollen belly, feeling their pup kick strongly. "I hope our child finds a love like ours someday. With Julian and you as parents?" Thomas smiled. "They'll know what real love looks like. That's the best gift you can give them." 7 months after the announcement, on a night when the full moon hung heavy and bright in the sky, Isadora went into labor. Julian, the fierce alpha king who faced enemy warriors without flinching, nearly fainted when she gripped his hand and told him it was time. The birth was long and difficult, as first births often are. Julian refused to leave Isadora's side despite the healer's suggestions, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement and love. When their son finally emerged with a lusty cry that echoed through the birthing chamber, Julian was openly weeping with relief and joy. "He's perfect," Isadora breathed, exhausted but radiant as the healers placed their cleaned and swaddled son in her arms. "Absolutely perfect." Julian looked down at the tiny black-haired baby in his mate's arms, his son, his heir, his future, and felt his world expand in ways he'd never imagined. The fierce protectiveness he felt for Isadora multiplied tenfold, extending now to this precious new life they'd created together. "What should we name him?" Isadora asked. Julian touched his son's tiny hand, marveling when miniature fingers wrapped around one of his. "Thomas," he said, meeting his father's eyes across the room. The old king had been hovering anxiously in the doorway, and at hearing Julian's words, tears began streaming down his weathered face. "Thomas Marcus Steelbane, if you approve." "I'm honored," Thomas managed, moving closer to see his grandson. "More honored than I can say." They named their son Thomas, but from the beginning, everyone called him Tommy. He was a happy, healthy pup with his father's gray eyes and his mother's gentle disposition, though even in infancy, he showed signs of his father's strength. Julian was a devoted father, spending hours with his son despite his responsibilities as king. He'd learned from his own father's absence, understood the importance of being present, and refused to let duty completely consume his time with family. Isadora watched her mate transform yet again, seeing new depths of gentleness emerge as Julian cradled their tiny son. He sang to Tommy in a deep, rumbling voice, told him stories, and promised him a kingdom that would be better, safer, more just than any that had come before. The kingdom prospered under their joint rule. Julian's strength and Isadora's compassion balanced each other perfectly, creating a leadership style that was both firm and caring. Packs that had once existed in isolation began forming stronger bonds, united by the example their king and queen set. On Tommy's first birthday, a celebration was held that drew wolves from across the kingdom and beyond. As Isadora stood on the palace balcony, watching the festivities spread out below, Julian came to stand beside her, their son balanced on his hip. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his free arm around her waist. "Impossibly so," Isadora replied. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I went from being rejected and alone to having everything I could ever want. You deserved all of this and more," Julian said fiercely. "Your pack were fools who will spend the rest of their lives regretting how they treated you. You're the finest queen this kingdom has ever known, the most wonderful mate I could have asked for, and the most loving mother our son could have. And you're the king who saw past what everyone else dismissed," Isadora countered, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "The alpha who taught me I was strong, the mate who completed me, the father who will teach our son to be both fierce and gentle, just like you." "Mama," Tommy babbled, reaching for Isadora with chubby hands. "Dada." They both laughed at their son's first real words, and Julian passed him to Isadora, watching with love as she cuddled their child close. Thomas appeared on the balcony to join them, looking years younger than when Isadora had first found him bleeding in the forest. He'd found peace and purpose again, was actively involved in his grandson's life, and had become an invaluable advisor to Julian. "A family," Thomas said softly, looking at the three of them. "I thought I'd lost this, that I'd spend my remaining years alone, wandering without purpose. But you found me, Isadora, and in saving me, you saved all of us." "I think we saved each other," Isadora replied, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "That's what family does." As night fell, and the celebration continued below, the four of them stood together on the balcony, a family forged by fate, strengthened by love, and bound together by bonds that would last forever. Julian looked at his father, his mate, and his son, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. A few years ago, he'd been alone, convinced he'd never have a mate, slowly hardening into a ruler who knew only duty. Now he had everything: love, family, purpose, and hope for the future. All because one rejected Omega had heard an old man's cries for help and stopped to offer kindness when no one else would have. "I love you," Julian murmured to Isadora, pulling her close while being careful not to squish Tommy between them. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Isadora replied, feeling the mate bond hum with contentment between them. Forever and always, no matter what comes. And as the moon rose high over the kingdom, casting silver light across the land and its people, Julian and Isadora knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. Fierce and gentle, strong and kind, king and queen, alpha and omega, two halves of a perfect whole. Their story had begun with rejection and loneliness, with loss and wandering, but it had transformed into something beautiful, a love that was destined, a bond that was unbreakable, a family that was complete. In the forest where Isadora had first found Thomas, wildflowers bloomed even in the depths of winter, as if the earth itself was celebrating the love story that had begun in that very clearing. And whenever wolves passed that spot, they felt a sense of peace and rightness, as if fate had blessed the ground where everything had changed. Years would pass, and Tommy would grow strong and wise, learning from his parents and grandfather. More children would be born to Julian and Isadora, each one loved and treasured. The kingdom would face new challenges and new triumphs. But through it all, the foundation of love and partnership that Julian and Isadora had built would remain unshaken. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, Julian would tell Tommy the story of how his parents met, how a rejected Omega had shown kindness to a lost old man, never knowing that simple act of compassion would change the course of destiny itself. "Remember, my son," Julian would always conclude, holding Tommy close, "that strength comes in many forms. Your mother's gentleness is every bit as powerful as my fierceness. True strength is knowing when to fight and when to heal, when to command and when to comfort. The greatest leaders are those who understand that power without compassion is tyranny, but compassion without strength is vulnerability." And Tommy, looking between his fierce, devoted father and his gentle, unshakable mother, would understand that he'd been given the greatest gift any child could receive: parents who embodied both sides of strength, who loved each other with everything they were, and who would teach him to be whole rather than merely powerful. As the years turned into decades, the story of the rejected Omega who became queen would be told throughout the kingdom and beyond, a tale of hope and transformation that reminded everyone that sometimes the people society deems weak or worthless are exactly the ones destiny has been preparing for greatness. And in the royal chambers of the palace, where Julian and Isadora grew old together, their love never diminished, but only deepened, becoming more precious with each passing year. They'd found each other when both were lost, had built a life of purpose and meaning together, and had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was, in every sense, a love story for the ages, fierce and gentle, powerful and tender, destined and true. And it all began with one simple act of kindness on a cold winter night, when a rejected Omega heard a cry for help and chose to answer, never knowing that in saving one lost soul, she would find her own salvation. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.